You don't accidentally throw for 8,600 yards and 65 touchdowns in the Big Ten. But right now, everybody in Chicago is hyper-fixated on the defensive line and the salary cap math, completely ignoring the massive leverage shift happening right behind Caleb Williams. We're staring down a reality where Tyson Bagent could actually get flipped for real draft capital. If Ryan Poles screws up this backup transition, we're one bad hit away from a lost season. You don't gamble at the quarterback room when the stakes are this high. We're going to break down the Montez Sweat situation, the Jadeveon Clowney math, and the Maxx Crosby market that just blew wide open again. But you gotta stick around until the end of this video, because Poles just brought in a specific, under-the-radar prospect for a closed-door visit. A kid with 65 college touchdowns on his resume, and it completely alters the math on our Day 3 draft strategy. If you want raw, clinical analysis on how this roster's actually being built, hit that like button. Let's get into the numbers. The entire conversation around this defensive front is a total mess right now. But everything revolves around the one guy they're actually trying to build this thing around, Montez Sweat. For what feels like forever, Montez Sweat has been carrying the absolute weight of this defensive line. His raw strength is the only reason this unit hasn't completely caved in. But he's out there eating double teams without any credible backup on the other side. Chicago has thrown a ridiculous number of bodies at those other spots without finding a single long-term answer. We brought in guys like Dayo Odeyingbo and Grady Jarrett recently, dropping cash on them, but the return on investment just hasn't materialized. You don't treat a premier pass rusher like a tackling dummy. When Sweat absorbs 2 blockers every snap and the rest of the line generates 0 pressure, you're just burning cap space and wasting his prime. That puts Ryan Poles in a corner with one absolute mandate: find Sweat a legitimate partner on the edge. And the name that fits the exact physical and financial profile is Jadeveon Clowney. Clowney's career hasn't exactly been the storybook ride scouts projected back in 2014. But look at the actual resume. The guy's an absolute freak against the run, and his pressure rate has kept him producing at a top-tier level well into the back half of his career. He's 33 years old now, throwing on a jersey for 7 different organizations over the last 8 seasons. That's just the mercenary role he plays now. If you look at just the last 3 seasons alone, he's racked up 26 sacks. That's production you pay for. People see him bouncing around and assume his tank is empty. They aren't running the numbers. 26 sacks over 3 years is an undeniable asset regardless of what laundry he's wearing. We're dragging a massive list of priorities into this market, and we aren't printing money at Halas Hall. Dealing with the cap and keeping the budget tight dictates every single move Poles makes. Pull up the spot rack projections right now. Clowney's next contract sits around $7 million. That's almost guaranteed to be a straight-up one-year deal. Because it's a short-term rental, you're looking at 0 dead money bleeding into 2027. Passing up a deal like that is just bad asset management. For under $6 million bucks, you take that deal. It's a zero-risk calculation that keeps the cap clean for next year while immediately upgrading the pressure rate. Putting Clowney next to Sweat completely changes the blocking schemes. It lets Sweat actually hunt the quarterback instead of eating turf. Clowney is the exact rotational piece this defense is starving for. But if we shift over to the trade market, there's a massive name quietly leaking out of Arizona right now. Which brings us to the big move that blew up and how the edge rusher market is actually moving now. Everybody was waiting for a blockbuster splash, and it didn't happen. Ryan Poles flat out admitted the organization was on the phone trying to pull off a wild trade for Raiders All-Pro Maxx Crosby, but those talks hit a wall. With that door shut for the moment, a totally different, highly realistic target quietly opened up on the radar. Listen to the March 9th drop of the PHNX Sports Cardinals podcast. Co-host Johnny Venerable leaked that Arizona Cardinals edge rusher Josh Sweat is very likely getting shipped out. Venerable put it right out there. I think that Josh Sweat will get traded. When former Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon got fired, Josh Sweat asked to be traded. That came straight through Chris Franklin over at NJ.com. At 28 years old, Josh Sweat has basically turned into one of the most quietly brutal edge rushers in this league. His 2025 run in the desert was probably the absolute best tape he's ever put out. Look at the raw numbers. He wrapped up 2025 with 30 tackles, 13 of those eating up guys behind the line of scrimmage. He racked up 12 sacks and punched out 4 fumbles playing all 17 games. That sack count put him at 8th in the entire NFL. He was living at the top of the league in strip sacks. 12 sacks and 4 forced fumbles isn't just pressure, it's a turnover engine. When a guy is knocking the ball loose at that rate, he's actively stealing possessions. That flips games. At 6'5" and 265 pounds, Sweat is built to lock down the edge against the run while hunting the quarterback on passing downs. Ever since he got a full-time starting gig in 2021, he hasn't dropped below 6.5 sacks in a single year. That kind of steady floor is rare. When you look at Sweat's contract, the math is actually way better than you'd expect. He inked a 4-year, $76.4 million extension back in 2025 that packed in $41 million guaranteed. For this 2026 season, his base salary sits around $9.78 million, carrying an overall cap hit right around $16.4 million. Paying $16 million against the cap for a 12-sack player in his prime is highway robbery. When guys like Nick Bosa and TJ Watt are eating $30 million plus, acquiring Sweat for half the price is a financial masterclass. Pulling off a trade probably forces Chicago to cough up at least a day 2 draft pick. But for a defense starving for a reliable edge presence, converting a draft pick into Sweat's guaranteed production brings a return that completely justifies the price tag. But hold on, because a fresh report just dropped suggesting the biggest name in the trade market isn't actually off the board, and the Bears are absolutely still in the mix. This Maxx Crosby trade saga is turning into a massive leverage war. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN jumped on SportsCenter on March 15th and dropped a major update on exactly how things are moving. Everybody seems like they're in a good spot, but since the Raiders already looked at trading, they're open to that possibility, potentially, if the right offer would come, Fowler said. We're looking at timelines here. Now is going to be a little slow, but you get closer to the draft, perhaps trade offers will heat up. That's a textbook leverage leak. The Raiders are trying to play it cool, but they're publicly broadcasting that they are still taking calls. The door is wide open. For a Chicago team holding serious draft capital, this report kicks the whole thing open again. Look at the facts. The Baltimore Ravens actually had a deal locked in to ship 2 first-round picks to Vegas for Crosby, but the whole thing blew up when Baltimore backed out at the last second over a failed physical tied to his knee surgery. Meanwhile, Crosby's surgeon is screaming that his rehab is perfectly on schedule. That massive collapse completely tanked Crosby's immediate price tag and killed Vegas's leverage. The market for edge rushers dried up incredibly fast right after that. Baltimore threw a massive bag at Trey Hendrickson, Washington locked down Odafe Oweh, and the Chargers paid up to keep Khalil Mack. Every single one of those contracts hitting right around the $100 million mark. Dallas went out and traded Green Bay for Rashawn Gary, refusing to up their offer for Crosby. Vegas overplayed their hand. They got greedy, the market shifted overnight, and now they're stuck holding an expensive, disgruntled player while the rest of the league spent their cap space. Right now, Chicago is sitting in a prime spot to go after Crosby at a discounted rate. Poles pulled off that trade, sending DJ Moore to the Buffalo Bills, bringing back another second-round pick. That move leaves the Bears holding enough ammo to put together a serious package, sitting on pick number 25 in the first round, plus pick number 57 and number 60 in the second. Flip the wide receiver for pick 60. That's a heavy move. But if Poles converts that specific draft capital into a generational pass rusher like Crosby, the math checks out perfectly. The front office actually brought in some heavy-hitting pieces on defense this offseason, grabbing linebacker Devin Bush and defensive tackle Neville Gallimore. But that game-wrecking guy on the edge still isn't on the roster. Throwing one of those second-round picks at a veteran pass rusher actually makes way more sense than gambling at the bottom of the first round. This year's draft edge class drops off a cliff after round 1.
Bringing in Crosby isn't just plugging a hole, it's a calculated strike that shifts the balance of the NFC. You don't hoard mid-round draft picks when you have a roster built to compete immediately. You consolidate assets and acquire elite talent. But while everyone is staring at the defensive line, this front office is already calculating their next move at a completely different position.
The backup quarterback spot rarely grabs the headlines, but historically, that locker room chair carries a massive amount of weight. Right now, the entire dynamic at that position is shifting. Tyson Bagent held it down solidly since he walked into the building in 2023. He's played well enough that Ryan Poles is literally fielding trade calls from other front offices. To handle the transition and keep the room stable, Chicago brought veteran Case Keenum back on a new deal. But looking at the board, this front office is clearly thinking way past just this upcoming season. Bagent proved he's a capable NFL arm. If another franchise is willing to surrender actual draft capital for a backup, you execute the trade and collect the asset. If you catch the latest report from Jacob Infante over at PFSN, he dropped that the Bears are bringing in Rutgers quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis for an official pre-draft local visit. Chicago is aggressively hunting for young, raw talent to groom directly behind Caleb Williams on a cheap rookie deal. You don't use up a private local visit unless the scouting department sees a highly specific developmental trait. Poles is constructing a cheap, sustainable quarterback pipeline. Here's exactly why we opened the show talking about day 3 of the draft. Kaliakmanis put together a massive chunk of tape over 4 years, playing for both Minnesota and Rutgers. He racked up 8,604 passing yards and accounted for 65 total touchdowns. Right now, the scouts have him circled as a day 3 pick. 65 total touchdowns in the Big Ten proves a baseline level of red zone efficiency. He produces against physical defensive fronts. That's a measurable metric, not just potential. Looking at his college run, Kaliakmanis proved he could run an offense efficiently and string together wins for 2 different programs. He has undeniable arm strength, and reports suggest his locker room presence is a legitimate asset. He definitely started leaning way heavier on his arm as he got older. The mechanics of his release and his footwork require immediate refinement. Those are the exact technical tweaks head coach Ben Johnson is going to have to hammer into him to fit this specific offensive scheme. Scouts aren't pegging Kaliakmanis as a guy who's going to take over an NFL franchise right away, but that script flips when you drop him into Ben Johnson's scheme. Getting the chance to watch Caleb Williams operate while soaking up veteran mechanics from Case Keenum is a massive advantage. For a Bears front office that prioritized the quarterback position, taking a swing on Kaliakmanis is the exact kind of low-risk, high-upside asset calculation you make on day 3 of the draft. Stop complaining about the lack of flashy moves and look at the actual roster construction. If you want clinical, BS-free analysis on how this team operates, hit subscribe. We don't do fluff here. See you in the next breakdown.